Loud. I hate that thing so loud. All righty, so let me introduce to you Greg Coy from Arctic Wolf. Got to look at the boss's cap back here. We've got one of your caps in the building. And we also have Ryan Thomas from Parkview Hospital. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself a little bit better than that, and then we'll work from there. Go ahead, Greg.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Coy. I am a senior sales engineer with Arctic Wolf. I've been in IT for, I'm going to show my age here, 25 years, cybersecurity for 15 of those. I worked for a Fortune 200 company, a manufacturer down in Columbus, Indiana for those 15 years. And I managed their security operations program. So without knowing kind of the background of everybody, I'll explain what some of these acronyms are, and I apologize if I'm over-explaining. I just don't know where everybody's is exactly today, but I manage their SIM, which is Security Information and Event Management System, their DLP or Data Loss Prevention solution, their IPS Intrusion Prevention System, as well as their antivirus for about 50 to 60,000 endpoints. It fluctuated quite a bit. Great learning experience for me through that period of time, and got a really good feel for how monumental the task is for managing security operations in an ever-changing threat landscape, as well as an ever-changing ecosystem within any corporate environment that's perpetually changing, right? So it was a great learning experience for me. And gave me a great understanding of the challenge that lies ahead of us right now. And a lot of what I'll be speaking about today is around the opportunity for you to look at cybersecurity as a potential career choice. There's a lot of opportunity there. It's a great place to be, and it's something that we need you in that space, right? We need people, and the bad guys have endless resources. They're operating as a team across the globe, and what we need is more people like yourselves joining the team and getting on our side and getting in the game, right? So without the corporate space aside, I've been in a number of companies looking at advanced persistent threats and malware prevention, privilege access management, and recently moved to Arctic Wolf about 7 months ago, and that's where really kind of my heart is, and where I've spent my career in the corporate space in security operations, and looking at kind of activity in the environment and trying to put all those disparate pieces together and figure out what's actually happening, what needs the attention focused on it on this minute. So that's my background, and afterwards, obviously, I'll be around if anybody has any questions about the space, but I'll turn it over from there.
Hey, how's everyone doing? My name is Ryan Thomas. I am an information security engineer with Parkview Health. I also have another gig where I work with the Ohio Air National Guard. I'm a master sergeant, and I am in the 179th Cyber Warfare Wing. So I have been in information for security for about 8 years now, working both DoD and then here private network, protecting our patients and our health data there. So I get a little bit of experience from both sides of the house, seeing nation state actors and criminals trying to get into our enterprises and get to our data.
All righty, thank you. We're going to let you start, Greg, first, as you're the business side. Then we'll let Ryan do the second. Then about a half an hour of you guys discussing back and forth and answering some of the questions I know that the students will have. So go right ahead, sir.
Okay, just bear with me 1 second here.
I have a feeling you need
It says disabled participant screen sharing.
All right, try it again.
There we go.
All right. Huh? I don't know how to do that.
Okay, can you see that screen okay?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to start off here with a little bit of kind of, what we focus on at Arctic Wolf. I'm not going to spend much time talking about what we do. This is really meant to be more educational about the opportunity in the cyberspace, more than anything else. But this slide I have to speak to, right? Because it says end cyber risk, which we all know that that's virtually impossible, is to end it. What we try to do and achieve is to really reduce the amount of risk in any environment to an acceptable level. So it's about reducing risk to an acceptable risk level. So I want to always like to touch on that, because I don't ever like coming in and say we're going to end cyber risk, right? There's no ending it. It's always going to be there. There's always going to be some residual risk in place. And I think we all know that. So I told you about my background. I really just want to focus here up front on some statistics, and I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. But according to the Verizon 2021 data breach incident report, there were over 5,000 confirmed breaches, which is an increase of roughly 25% from 2020. The 2021 average cost of a breach was over $9 million. Only 47% of organizations noted that they are able to address most or all of the security alerts that they receive in a single day. And the reason that is because we have a number of point solutions, meaning you have antivirus, you have firewall, you have MFA, you have all your log data from your technology stack as well as your security stack, alerting and alarming and, buzzing, whistling. It's like Vegas, right? But there, you have all these disparate events firing at any given time, and oftentimes unrelated to one another, but yet still need to be addressed. So this metric here is pretty telling about the situation and what we're dealing with in the security space today. And then in 21, breaches caused by malicious attacks took an average of 287 days to identify and contain. So that's the mean time to detect and the mean time to respond. That 287 days. So think about that, 8 to 9 months of time passes by with an attacker in the environment before most companies are aware. That's the mean, right? So that's far too long. And what happens in that period of time is the attacker is able to embed himself into multiple areas of the environment. And at the end of the day, the overall remediation cost goes through the roof. And so the goal is to identify attacks early and mitigate those threats as quickly as possible. If you can do that, then obviously it's a curve that causes the overall cost to come down, the resources brought to bear are reduced, and the overall damage to the environment is limited. And then 90% of businesses have a cloud security readiness gap. Now, it's probably no surprise because of the digital transformation or the cloud migration that's occurred over the last 5 to 7 years or so has really picked up in earnest. Certainly over these last few years, what we've seen is a tremendous migration to the cloud. And so cloud environments in general, if you start talking about, infrastructure as a service, or even software as a service, right? But you have overly permissive environments that by default, standing up, if it's an AWS environment and you're deploying virtual machines in your AWS environment, by default, it's overly permissive. Applications deployed out in the cloud are by default overly permissive. So that's no surprise that 92% have a cloud security readiness gap. So that's an instrumental part of the attack surface today is the cloud environment. And then organizations with more than 50 tools rank 8% lower in the ability to detect a cyber attack. So again, this is about multiple point solutions deployed in the environment that need to be maintained. They need to be monitored. They need to be responded to whenever they start alarming and they send out alerts or generating incidents. Complexity is the enemy of security, right? That's a saying that we use quite a bit in the security field, but it truly is the case. The more that you deploy into an environment, the more complex it is to identify what's real, because at the end of the day, most organizations get thousands of alerts that fire every day, week, and month. but only a small portion of those are really true positives, meaning something that needs to be responded to. So the more you deploy, the more false positives you get, the more isolated the environment becomes. And that's where, we all hoped back in the day that SIEM, or security information event management, would be that kind of that one-stop shop for detection, and to tell us what exactly is happening in the environment right now that we need to be focused on. With all these alerts flying around, what are the real true positives that I need to be focused on at this given time as a security professional? And unfortunately, because SIEM is very difficult to manage, it's very onerous. There's a lot of tuning that goes on and with a SIEM. The threat landscape changes, as I mentioned, but also the environment changes, right? Security drift happens and new firewall rules are put in place. You have new policies that are deployed through Active Directory. You have new cloud services that are deployed. So that happens on an ongoing basis, and the SIEM needs to be tuned accordingly. So the amount of overhead involved in managing a SIEM effectively starts climbing up. And that's what's happened to most companies. SIEM has become more of a log aggregation facility than it has really a threat identification or detection facility. And so and I lived and breathed that whenever I was in the corporate space, and realized that, we turned on IDS and IPS and our antivirus, and we were immediately up to 9,000 events per second. And we had out of that all of the correlation that happens within a SIEM, and you have all this normalization and machine learning and AI that happens through the technology stack in the correlation. Out of that comes, a percentage. It's usually a little less than 10% of the total that are security relevant or potentially relevant security incidents that need human investigation. And, it needs to be run to ground and to identify whether it's a true positive or false positive. That right there, that human piece, is a tremendously heavy lift for most organizations, right? The Fortune 200s, they can afford to hire that many people. At least some of them can, not all of them. But we're talking, to do this 24/7, you're talking about $1 million in just people to bring in to run 24/7. That doesn't count any of the security technology, right, that you have to deploy, manage, and maintain on an ongoing basis. So it's incredibly expensive to find the people and retain them. It's incredibly difficult right now because of the skills gap. But there's something, to be said for effective security operations and focusing, on SIEM and plugging that gap with the visibility by using an MDR provider. This is really what Arctic Wolf does. And that's where I see things going. And that's why I joined the company, is because there's just not enough people, and companies are more and more relying on a managed services provider to provide that heavy lift of security operations. So, and I'll get a little bit more into that here in just a minute. So initially, this slide really speaks to the cloud killing the perimeter, but I would throw in here as well, COVID helped kill the perimeter as well, right? The cloud was already expanding the threat, the perimeter to the cloud, and bringing in this, adding complexity to threat monitoring. So along with COVID, and you had the remote workforce, you had a lot of users working from home. We've always had, at least as long as I've been in IT, laptops and people going to Starbucks and working from there, VPNing in. But we've not seen really kind of this shift to third-party services like AWS, G Suite, and 365 Azure, like we have over the last 5 years. So a lot of these environments live in these cloud footprints today, and becomes much more difficult to monitor those environments. So again, back to the expansion, it started with laptops and behind the perimeter, and it's expanded out beyond our corporate perimeter that we once had. But also, kind of in conjunction with all of this, we've had the threat actor maturation process that's occurred over the last decade. And so nation states are active. They are working around the clock. They have limitless funds. They are constantly probing our environments to see if they can get a foothold in our environments. They are certainly part of the overall threat landscape. And what it's become is really kind of an industrialized threat research group is what they are. They are working together. They are sharing code. They're buying and selling and stealing code to use in their attack patterns, their techniques, tactics, and procedures. They're also called TTPs. That's a very real thing. They work 24/7. They have call centers. They have ransomware groups that have their own call centers. They operate like normal organizations operate. It's a very mature and a very there's a lot of money to be made in that industry, right? So billions of dollars that are stolen every year. So not to mention the untold fortunes of intellectual property that are stolen. And it's really leveled the playing field. So nation states are definitely a huge danger and part of the overall attack surface that we need, or sorry, the threat surface that we monitor on an ongoing basis. So 90% don't believe that they're living up to the necessary cyber footprint or cyber approach that they need to be to adequately protect their environments. So I'm going to buzz through this slide here because this is more of a corporate slide. But we have to, the key thing here is that we have to unify our technology stack, right? It's not just about the security stack. We can bring all these things together, but if we're not monitoring Active Directory, we're not monitoring our servers and collecting those logs, we're not monitoring the cloud footprint, then we're missing a huge piece of what's happening in the environment. So we have to unify our technology stack and have broad visibility across the entire attack surface. And then we have to build resilience into that program. So 24/7 posture is critical. According to our own metrics at Arctic Wolf, about 40% of the attacks that we see occur within our customer environments occur after 8 p.m. and before 8 a.m. If it makes sense, if you think about, well, a lot of these threat actors are based in Europe, they're based in Asia. That's their workday, right? So we go home and they just start pounding. And so we have to have 24/7 coverage. That's another key thing, piece along with the broad visibility that gives us really that overall effectiveness when it comes to security operations. So this is, back to the mean time to detect and mean time to respond or mean time to contain. That's another way to say that. But 287 days, is far too long. And the average cost is $1.2 million in a response when more than 200 days. So if you look at this middle circle here at the bottom, that's really the key piece I want to touch on. Like, the problem is growing every year, right? We're doing a little better, to be fair, than we were several years ago in this metric, this mean time to detect. We're doing a little better, but not by much. So we're throwing more and more money at it, and I'll talk to that in just a minute. We're throwing more people at it, but the problem's not getting any better. So it's a combination of people, tools, and processes that we have to fix. But this middle circle here is the 1.5 million security gaps, right? That was through 2020, and it's only grown since then. So we need people. We need skilled people that are capable of jumping in and helping fight this battle that we're in. So some fundamental challenges here, right? I've spoken to a couple of these so far, but there's too much noise. Alert fatigue is a real thing. Again, it's the Vegas alert fatigue that's happening with all these alerts that are going off on a continuous basis. And I'll just point out to one breach in particular. That was if you remember this breach, it was the Target breach back in around 2015. They had a security vendor in there, which I won't name names, but they did have a vendor in there, very sophisticated capability that this vendor provided. And this vendor was calling Target again and again because their alerts were firing left and right. Well, the Target folks also had 1,000 other alerts firing left and right. But what should they pay attention to? And that's part of the issue that we have today. The skill shortage is very real, and I'll talk to that again in just a minute. But retaining talent is very difficult. Finding talent and retaining talent is very difficult. When you do find somebody, when an employer finds somebody, within 6 months to a year, that person could very easily go on and make 20, 30%, maybe 40% more somewhere else. That's how competitive this market is today. The cost of the response time. So the longer the dwell time, the more expensive it's going to be to remediate, right? For those reasons that I noted previously. Again, the key thing here is the skills shortage. So if you have any interest in cybersecurity, because I know, they're IT, broadly IT students, but cybersecurity, I think, is a great place to be from a career perspective. And I think that, I started in IT. I started as a desktop support technician, supporting engineers, software developers. And then I moved into more of a Citrix, if you're familiar with that, administration, and then into Active Directory and Windows administration and architecture, and then to VMware and virtualization. So I had this broad background of IT. And that really helped when it came to pivoting into cyber. It helped me understand kind of how these systems interact with one another and interoperate. The one piece that I wish I would have had more of was the networking side. And that's something that I've had to try to bone up on over the years and really kind of improve my skill set there. Because if you have a networking background, you really understand at a low level the attack methodologies, right? You have a better understanding of how these things propagate within an environment. You're better at kind of understanding the low level architecture and ecosystem of an attack. So I would just recommend, if you are taking some of those classes, make sure that you pay attention to your networking courses. It will provide a lot of dividends down the road. So all of these, and I won't go through each of these, but all of these will circumvent prevention tools. So ransomware, I'll just focus on that one because it is so prevalent, especially in healthcare today. But ransomware, there are really organizations that are established of these threat actors that have their own help desk where you can call in and you can pay the ransom, or you can get help paying the ransom. There's a group called the Black Bite ransomware group, among others, that do this. But one of the tactics that they're using now is that before they encrypt your data on your corporate network, they exfiltrate it to a cloud service. And then at that point, they encrypt your data, and then they ransomware you. And if you don't pay the ransom, they then hold the data in the cloud service for ransom and threaten to release it to the public, basically causing an exposure or a breach. So the tactics are evolving, and it's not getting much better. And ransomware is very easy to get through control systems, right? And so we've seen it over and over and over again, and it comes up on a lot of our calls, right, as a driver for why a company might be looking at Arctic Wolf. But it's something that's, they only have to be right one time, and you have to play defense across, a 24/7 attack surface and footprint, and it's very difficult to catch this. So again, early detection, early containment is really what it's all about, especially when we're talking about ransomware. So going back to the early days, right, of security, passwords, patch management, backups, that's where we were focused. And we thought, well, let's just get that under control. And then we saw that we had viruses easily making their way into the environment, right, just through emails, which ironically still happens to this very day. So what we did was we said, well, let's put up a hard perimeter. Let's put these spam filters in place and web filters, and put proxies in place, and we'll route all our web traffic through these proxies to make sure that we're monitoring all that traffic. We can identify potentially bad websites, and we'll stop that, that malicious code from getting into the environment with this hardened edge perimeter. Well, then you hear the whole adage around a hard exterior but a soft gooey middle. Once the attacker got into the environment, which was inevitable, free reign on the internal environment. So then we got to a place where we need to have defense in depth. we need to have multiple controls layered throughout the external to the internal to the core of the network to make sure that we're identifying these attacks along the way. And we can have multiple checkpoints and multiple control layers within the environment to prevent an attacker from accomplishing his goal. So what we did was we deployed endpoint antivirus and advanced protections. We deployed DLP, and we started running secure socket layer inspection and deep packet inspection, and then putting DDoS controls in place or detection in place, and then using IPSs, as I mentioned before, and then CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, which essentially allows you to control the access within the cloud environments on a more scrutinized basis. But again, that wasn't enough, and we still continue to see an increase in the amount of breaches, despite all of these controls that we're putting in place. So where most companies think they want to be today is this in-house SOC, and some companies are able to pull this off, right? I know companies that at a fairly small level, several thousand employees that have their own in-house SOC, and they do a very good job of it. But they have, invested a lot of money in their security technology. They brought in some really great people that know how to run, a security operations center, but it's still very tough to run 24/7. So a continuous improvement of your security posture, is obviously where companies want to be. And then, quick remediations, quick vulnerability patching, and quick policy updates to reduce security drift and harden the footprint, right? But ultimately, where this is going, I believe, is for most companies that can't afford, 24/7 or to staff 10 to 12 employees to monitor the environment in a SOC, it's really going to move towards MDR providers, right? Or managed security services providers, and to help bridge that gap. And to at least until the skills gap is reduced. And we can then, like, when you reduce the skills gap, you then bring down the overall, price for all of these employees that you have to bring in. And it becomes more of a cost-effective possibility for organizations. It's just not there today. So if you look at what it requires to deploy a SIEM, you have, I'll just talk about the top, 10 to 3 o'clock here on this circle, but you have to have a SIEM in place, right? You have to do tuning and reporting on a continuous basis, collect logs from every area of the environment, and then do the aggregation and correlation of all those logs, and make sense of what's happening, and then do that human investigation, which that threat hunting piece is a part of, but really running to ground all of these security relevant incidents that then require human eyes to make sure that it's a true positive. It's incredibly onerous in terms of just the technology to put in place. But then when you start talking about the people, again, it's 24/7, you're talking about, 10 to 12 people to run 24/7. So when we talk about the skills gap and the challenge that we have today, I pulled these from Glassdoor, and you look at the current pay scales, right? And this is for Indianapolis, not Fort Wayne, but this is, close enough. They're going to be fairly similar, but $156,000 a year for a security architect, right? $116,000 for a security engineer, and then an analyst, $110,000. And this keeps going up every year. So again, this is contributing to the issue that corporations have in hiring and retaining security professionals to maintain that security operations, which is that heavy lift. And then again, if you look here at the lower left here, this is a very interesting metric. If the current total employed cybersecurity workforce in Indianapolis is around 11,700. The total cybersecurity job openings are 7,500. So think about those numbers. How many people are working? More than half, they have job openings, right? Again, there's a huge gap here that's not getting filled, and this gap is only growing on an annual basis. So that's kind of indicative of why you see these pay scales increasing year over year, kind of more than the market average. And then you see kind of over the lower right what these positions and the job titles really what they consist of, and the different areas. And so cybersecurity consultant, analyst, the penetration vulnerability tester, really, key areas of the cybersecurity role that need to be filled. And so again, Indianapolis is not unlike the rest of the country in terms of the skills gap and the national average, right? And in terms of the geographic concentration, we don't have enough people to fill the gap. And it's the same, it's a little better in Fort Wayne, but it's not much better in Fort Wayne, right? It's still, the gap is still growing in Fort Wayne. So the spend on cybersecurity, as I mentioned, keeps growing. We're expecting to spend in this year, in full year 2022, more than $50 billion on cyber, all right, as an industry, $50 billion. And then we've seen these attacks and these successful breaches grow year over year, and they really haven't relinquished. They're still growing. They continue to increase. And so the key point here is that vendor neutral cybersecurity information sources, they don't point to a single tool, practice, or vendor as a solution. They instead focus on common topics like the personnel, the skill set issues, education, threat surfaces, and the human factor. So if you look at that, personnel and skill set, education, threat surfaces, and the human factor, the vast majority of that is really you, right? It's us. It focuses on us as really the key, the linchpin that will help bring together a potential solution to this problem. It's not going to be solved with technology, right? Technology is going to give us a potential outcome. And then from there, we have to go validate that this is real. And AI, despite all of the potential in AI, it won't be, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it doesn't represent Arctic Wolf, but we do use AI in our technology stack, but it will not solve the problem. It won't address the threat, the attack surface over time, because the threat actors will use AI as well, right? Machine learning will be used by the threat actors as well. So whatever we use, they will use as well. So it's this war that goes on back and forth, and each side evolves. They just have to be right once. We have to be right 100% of the time. That's why we're at a disadvantage. So briefly here, in terms of cyber insurance, I wanted to bring this up because this is a key driver for what we see as companies reaching out to Arctic Wolf and other MDR providers, because cyber insurance carriers about 5 years ago, they decided that they were going to insure pretty much anybody from a cyber insurance perspective. Now, that was all great up front, right? But what's happened over the last several years is that it's got real, and they've had to pay out left and right. So their expenditures, their outlays have gone through the roof. And so what we're seeing now is that the premiums are increasing. The requirements on businesses to even get insurance have increased as well. So where you did just have to have maybe MFA in place. Now you have to have, 24/7 security operations monitoring in place. You have to have, perimeter controls in place. You have to have endpoint detection and response in place. So you have to have all of these different requirements and controls in place before you can even get insurance in some cases. And so the coverage is reducing overall as well. So all of this combined means that companies are investing more and more in cybersecurity, which means they're investing more and more in cybersecurity personnel, right, and professionals. So again, it's expanding the market. One of the other things expanding the market as well is the compliance regulations. And so this obviously carries a significant impact. You have, and I won't go through all of these, but from a health perspective, you have HIPAA, right? That's really driven a lot of controls and investment in cybersecurity controls over the last decade. FISMA, which is federal government information systems management. PCI DSS, payment card industry standards. This has been in place for a decade or more now. GDPR, which went in place in Europe, right, from a privacy perspective. And then NIST 853. So NIST provides federal agencies the guidelines for securing information systems, but this is also a common framework being used across really the private sector as well. And it's something that we adhere to at Arctic Wolf in terms of helping organizations meet those critical controls that need to be in place to adequately protect their environment, to protect their customers, and to get cyber insurance. as well. So these regulations, and another one which I didn't even put on here, but CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity, now I'm going to forget it. Cybersecurity maturity model certification. Thank you. Finally got it. For manufacturers that do business with the DoD. This is now in place, and it's driving a lot of companies and manufacturers that do business with the federal government, specifically DHS and the DoD, to get this certification. And in the certification are a lot of controls in place that are required to be in place in order to do business. So for some companies, this is a significant percentage of their revenue that just goes away. They can't even bid on a federal project if they don't meet the CMMC level of certification. So these requirements are really driving a lot of companies to make further investments. Again, it's increasing the demand for cybersecurity professionals and for the overall cybersecurity investment. So I'll end with this. Again, there's too much noise, and it's difficult to identify the signal. So signal to noise, right? There's too many alerts going on at any given time in the IT infrastructure. What's real? What's important? How do I take this one alert that I see on my endpoint and know that it's real? Well, I correlate that with an Active Directory, a log, and then I see my network perimeter. I see my IDS or my IPS or my network sensor, flag a communication with a command and control server, an IP address, and I put those all together to understand that there's an attack underway, a known attack. Maybe it's a ransomware attack, but an attack that's underway and something that I need to respond to. The attack surface is continuously expanding. It's going to keep growing from where we are. It's not consolidating anytime soon. The cyber insurance carriers are, again, increasing premiums and requiring more controls to be put in place in order to even get cyber insurance for most companies. And I've even, one anecdote here, I even read here a couple of weeks ago in Europe, and I think it's now occurred in the US, but a carrier actually stated that they can determine that an attack was perpetrated by a nation state, that they are going to refuse to pay out. So think about this for a minute. You have cyber insurance, you've paid the premiums on it. The cyber insurance carrier determines that this was a nation state that attacked you, and we're not going to pay out as a result. This is insanity. Okay, I'm just going to tell you right now, there's really very little chance that a cyber insurance carrier, despite if they use a third party or not to do forensics investigation, can determine that a nation state actually carried out an attack. Right? That's called attribution. You're attributing an attack to a certain threat actor or group. And code, because it is shared across the globe today, it's bought and sold and stolen, like I mentioned before. Just because it has Cyrillic in the code doesn't mean it's Russian. So the cyber insurance carriers are already looking for ways out, right, to not cover. So we're in a very dangerous spot here with cyber insurance. And so that's another reason why more and more investment is going to be going into 24/7 security operations monitoring and eyes on glass that Arctic Wolf, among others, offers. So again, compliance regulations driving more and more investment. And then there's this is the big note that I want to end on. And I think I've stressed it plenty of times in here, but there are too few cybersecurity professionals, and it's a great career path to look into. There's a number of certifications. I have two of them, the CISSP and the CISM, but there's a number of them that you can get. SANS has a number of them. There are some from EC2, but there are a number of certifications that can help you kind of get your foot in the door there. And then obviously a lot of classes there at Ivy Tech that you can take, that can help you kind of get familiarized with the security landscape and how to kind of start moving down that path. But every business is understaffed. And if they're not today, they will be tomorrow whenever their staff decides to move on to, more better paying jobs, and maybe something more along the lines that they want to achieve in a career path. So they're incurring more risk. Salaries are always increasing as a result. The opportunities, as I mentioned in the job openings metric, it's increasing on an annual basis as well. And then there's just no silver bullet in sight. We have nothing that's really showing up and presenting itself as this is going to solve our cybersecurity problems. It's here to stay for the foreseeable future. And in my personal opinion, it will only be until people like yourselves come out of the universities and they start really kind of jumping into cyber. We can help bridge this gap and start putting more people, skilled people in place to help fight the unending threat actors that exist out there. But because again, we're not just facing, people in their basement, that used to be the case. These are nation states with unending budgets and that have really the backing of their government in some cases that are attacking us. So I encourage you all to take a further look at it. If you have any questions after the fact, I'm more than happy to put you in touch with some resources that can kind of help you, help educate you on kind of how to move forward in the cybersecurity space. So with that, I'll wrap it up. And I don't know if we're taking questions now or moving straight to the next presenter.
We're going to move straight to the next presenter, and then we'll get together afterwards and answer all those questions. All righty?
Perfect.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to, all righty. Cool beans. I'll take back your screen and I'm going to find the new one here. Hang in there just a second while I move that aside. And let's see here. So I want your PowerPoint that I've got sitting up here. So and let's reshare that to where we want you to be. And there it is, right there.
Wonderful. Well, once again, my name is Ryan Thomas. I'm with Parkview Health. Before I get jump into this too deep, I do want to hit on a couple points that I heard in that last presentation that I absolutely are worth revisiting. And as you were discussing, taking data points out of SIEMs and evaluating whether they're real or not, I was actually sitting off to the side, looking at some indicators to evaluate if one of our flags needs to be followed up on or not. So it's a real thing out there. We need professionals to be able to verify what the computers think they're seeing out there. So I appreciate you hitting on those points. That and just general IT support going into security is so important. I love taking network guys and making them into security guys because they are our best performers. I started out on help desk and I got into securing projects, infrastructure projects, and now I got into security with it. And it really does make a big difference if you have a well-rounded knowledge of IT when you get into the security space. And then, yeah, just nation states are absolutely cyber criminals. And sometimes it's the same coin, two sides. Eastern Europe gets real muddy, whether who's grabbing your data and who's not. And sometimes cyber tools developed by nation states are being sold to cyber criminals. So you're getting hit from both sides with really advanced technology. So we got to go out there. We got to protect ourselves. And that's going to what I'm going to talk about a little bit here is like, what can you do to protect yourself in relation to health data specifically? And then I'll also talk about what Parkview's doing to help you guys as well. So we got to protect protecting your data is your job more than anybody else's. You have your data in place and you're there to protect it. HIPAA is there to protect you as far as what health insurance and hospitals and providers had to do with your data. But it's not there going to protect you all the time. And it's not going to protect you when you're owning your own data at that point. We have so many controls in place to protect your data when it's sitting on my health network. HIPAA prescribes dozens of controls and we follow NIST regulations to make sure we're doing the things to keep your data right. But if you're not doing the things that you need to do to keep your data right, it's still going to get out there. So as much as we can do at Parkview, you got as much to do at home to keep yourself safe. And we're going to go into some of those things. And let's talk about what HIPAA is. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Access Act. And it was developed to make sure that providers and health networks are protecting your health data. HIPAA prevents me from telling somebody else about your medical condition. And I can't share your medical data without your consent. Just because we own that data doesn't mean we have full rights to it. So that dictates how, as a health organization, we share information, protect information, disseminate information. That's why if you're trying to go get your health record, we make you jump through some hoops to get it, because we have to verify that we're letting the appropriate person access the appropriate data. We go through immense lengths. We have monitoring on all of our health records. If an individual in our organization who has access to health records is on your medical record for even 5 seconds, we know it. And if they're not supposed to be in there, we actually take disciplinary action. We verify with other providers before we send it out. We get express consent from you before we send it out. These are all the things that we do as a health organization to protect your data. And that is dictated to us by HIPAA. If we violate this rule, we actually have to report it to the state. I think it's within 24 hours. It's a really, really quick turnaround. It's a very serious business. And we do take it very seriously. We have entire pieces of our staff dedicated to HIPAA education, protection, investigation, and reporting. So that's what we do as Parkview Health. Let's talk about what you can do. The biggest thing you can do is secure your data. If you have it on your phone, do you have a password on your phone? You know, if you're storing it in your emails, what kind of passwords do you have on your emails? Are you using unique passwords? Are you using complex passwords? Are you storing this on, you know, if you're accessing it from your lovely desktop here at school, are you saving it on there? Because now it's out of your hands. You got to be deleting that if you're on a public workstation, even if you have an individual log on. You have to make sure that you know where your data is and you understand how you're storing your data. Because as soon as it's out of your hands, there's nothing you can do about it. One of the biggest things that people forget is actual physical things. When you get done at our positions, you get an after action report, right? It says, hey, this is what we did at your appointment today. We did this procedure, and here's your follow-up, and then this is your next appointment, and here's the prescription you have to go pick up. You go, great, you throw it away. Out of your hands. You're no longer protecting that data once you throw it away. That's the kind of thing you need to shred. This is the kind of data that people will try to pick up, and they will try to impersonate you to get prescriptions, especially if you're using some sort of painkiller or other addictive type prescriptions. It's really, really important that even with your prescription bottles, you're peeling the labels off and you're shredding them. It's all about securing your data. And that's the biggest thing is as soon as it's out of your hands, you can't protect it. You can't know where it is and you can't know who has it. You know, 99 out of 99 times or 100 times, it's just going to go to the dump and it's going to become sludge. No one's ever going to get it. But how do you know it's not that one time where someone's going to grab your information and use that? Because now they have your birth date. Now they have your address. Now they have your name. Now they have a medical condition. They have everything lined up to steal your identity. And that's because you just simply just threw it in the trash. And it's the same thing. If you're on a website and you're trying to get a second, you know, follow-up on a meeting you had with your doctor, and you're giving this website your health information to get a second opinion for free, they're taking that data and they're using that data to, you know, profile people in your demographic, your area. You're giving that data away in order to get this free second opinion. So you have to be really particular and you have to be really cognizant of where you're giving your data away to. Because once you give it to a source, once you give it to a website, once you give it to your neighbor, you lost that data and you have no control over where it goes from there and what's being done with it. So protecting your data with strong passwords, protecting your data with unique logins, protecting your data by shredding physical copies are all really, really important things to make sure you control your health information and ensure it doesn't get into other people's hands. And we do this at Parkview as well, protecting your data. We have data loss prevention tools. We know the things that are leaving our network. If health records leave our network in an unauthorized way, we're flagged immediately. We have shred boxes everywhere. You can't go 10 feet without a place for us to throw our medical paperwork in there to be shredded. It's securely shredded and verified. It never leaves custody until it's completely pulped. These are things that we do, and they're things that we recommend you to do as well. And we did talk about this a little bit, but medical identity theft is absolutely huge. Greg spoke briefly on how much or how valuable records are to be sold. When someone breaks into your network and steals your data, what do they do it? Well, they sell it for identity theft. And medical is a super lucrative document to steal. It has birth dates, names, parents' names, addresses. If you pay a bill, now you have financial information on there. They can get you your credit cards as much as they can get to the rest of your life. Medical records are one of the most valuable things to be sold on the dark web, which is where a lot of these thieves interact and turn their ill-gotten goods into profit. So you need to make sure that you are doing some things to protect yourself against medical theft. One thing is to verify who you're giving the information to before you give the information to. If you're going to a website, make sure it's the actual website. Is it parkview.com or is it PRK, two little lowercase v's, IEW.com? So it looks like parkview.com because the v's look like a W. You know, are you paying attention? Are you on secure websites? Are you connecting securely with strong browsers? Sorry. Is your Chrome up to date? Is your Firefox up to date? If you're using Internet Explorer, you really should probably catch up because those things are super vulnerable. And even if you're on an appropriate website, they can still get in between and get this information. So safeguarding yourself with being up to date on your browsers, paying attention to the sites you're visiting, making sure that email you're responding to is actually from who says it. We do internal phish tests all the time at Parkview. We send emails that look super legit, that are absolutely fake, just to make sure no one's clicking on stuff they're not supposed to. Taking some time and learning common phishing tricks will save you a lot of heartache when people are trying to steal your identity, and particularly your medical identity. And once again, shred your stuff, guys. Shred it. I'm not a super paranoid person. Sometimes I hear some of these things that my peers do in day to day, and I'm like, oh, that's a little bit extreme. But I shred my stuff. I shred everything I get from the physician. You just really should. Storing information online. Make sure you know where you're storing it. If you're storing it somewhere where it's a free service, there's a good chance that someone's looking at your stuff. Unless it's something like at Parkview, we use a service called MyChart. It's an Epic product that stores your health information. And it is a program built to store your health information. It is protected. It's evaluated by HIPAA. It has not only our certification, it has high trust certification, which is a healthcare industry security certification. And it has another security team at Epic that's taking care of it. That's the kind of place where you want to store your health information, places that are built for storing health information. Putting your medical record on, Dropbox. You have a good password, that's good. You're probably okay, but do you know you're okay? They're not built to be secure for healthcare, so they are not protecting at a level that healthcare would protect at. So when you're putting your stuff out there, just remember, if it's not in your hands, you can't control it. And even if you've done what you've done, if you're storing it in a free site, you can't guarantee they've done what they need to do to protect your information. You can go to onguardonline.gov. That is a resource that was developed that's going to talk more about securing your personal information. It's going to talk more about phishing. It's going to be talking more about passwords. It's a really, really good resource. I recommend it. I got a lot of that information from their sister site that talks about public health information. But these are all things that we do at Parkview every day. We recommend that you guys do that in your own life every day. And these are real basic things that you should extend to, honestly, everything. Make sure all of your emails have good addresses. Make sure that you're paying attention to the websites you're going to. Make sure that before you throw something out, if that bill has your account number and your address on it, it probably should be shredded. Just good practices, taking the time to evaluate what you're doing online. It's going to go a long way to keeping yourself safe out there. Mine's pretty brief. I didn't want to drag on and get real deep into it because I wanted to give you guys some real tips that you can use in your day-to-day. I think we're going to do a question and answer now. And I'm happy to help Greg get through any of the things you guys have out there.
Let's do this. All right. So, just a second. All right, so let's see here. Come on over here. Yeah, let's start with the students out here. First off, do any of you have any questions out there? And we'll get started that way. I have one out here. Does COVID increase or decrease the volume of attacks? People work remotely today and would like to know if it's a good point for secure data.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure Greg can definitely speak to this since he's got an MDR and he sees it from a lot of different places. But yeah, COVID did increase attacks. There was more people home, more people looking for an alternate stream of income, and they were trying to find new illicit. As far as working from home, the first day that we went live after we sent everybody home from our actual work centers to work from home environment, I think we quadrupled our VPN connections overnight. That was a pretty stressful week. That turned into a stressful month that, it's still a little bit stressful. It is a good place to work. You can be very secure working from home if you're doing the appropriate things to keep yourself secure. And that comes back to how your organization's set up, things like VPN, two-factor to log connecting, ensuring they're using appropriate connection types when you're getting towards internal websites. DLP is huge, which is data loss prevention, monitoring what kind of data is entering and leaving the network. I'm sure Greg has a whole set of tools that's going to help you work safe from home and keep them organized in the alerts.
I would just add to it, Ryan, great points. In terms of endpoint security, because that's really what we're talking about, right? When COVID hit, the endpoints went everywhere, and Ryan's story is not unique, right? That companies were deploying VPN, in mass, like in a very short period of time, to try to secure that connection and provide access to corporate resources. Just some of the key things, the basic hygiene stuff, right? MFA, as Ryan mentioned, but also, plugging in USB keys and external drives is a threat. In many cases, it's, I think there's controls in place from a policy, just easily from an Active Directory policy perspective, putting those policies in place to disallow those devices. In some cases, you can't avoid it because it is required. However, there's things you can do in terms of DLP or antivirus, automated scanning whenever new devices are connected and things of that nature. From a endpoint perspective, what we see from endpoint detection and response, EDR, that essentially is like an advanced antivirus that allows you to threat hunt and to look at low-level telemetry on the endpoint to see kind of what activities taking place. If you see an attack on an endpoint, you can see where it originated. Was it from an email? Was it a drive-by download through Chrome? That type of thing. But EDR, as great as EDR is, and everybody needs EDR, okay? It's a given. You need some kind of advanced antivirus. That has to be in place. But what we see at Arctic Wolf from an MDR perspective is that really incidents originate from an EDR solution around 10% of the time. So in other words, our ticketed incidents are from 10% of our ticketed incidents are from an EDR solution. The other 90% are from our sensor, which is essentially, it's an IDS with some threat intelligence on it, monitoring the environment from logs that are being collected from Active Directory and from the cloud, from the server environment, and correlating all that information. That really is critical, right? So while you have to absolutely protect the endpoint because that's where a user is going to be checking email, and by and large, that's what we're seeing in terms of attacks across the board in the industry, is really phishing is still the easiest way to get into an environment, just tricking the employee. And Ryan had mentioned, security awareness training. That's critical. It's essential that we're trying to change the culture within the environment, within the corporation, to be more aware, security aware, security savvy, scrutinize emails on a more rigorous basis, hover over that link, look to see what that URL is, right? All those things need to be done. Always, assume that it's a phish. If you don't know who it is, assume that it is. All that needs to be done, and it's instrumental because humans are really the number one attack surface. And then beyond there, you get into their endpoint. And then beyond there, you get into more of the broader corporate network. But it's really around the big picture and the visibility, even though the endpoint is really typically the primary attack surface with the human sitting at the keyboard. So it really is comprehensive, and all these controls that we have to put in place that really helps us determine that there is an attack underway. But again, you have to make sense of what's happening, because there's thousands and thousands of events happening every given hour, right? So from what we ingest around 4 trillion events every week. And we're able to issue anywhere from 3 to 5 real, true positive incidents to our customers per week. So that's really, that gives you a scale of what has to happen to get down to a true positive. So the underlying question is, yes, COVID has caused an exacerbation of the problem that we have in terms of identifying real threats. But it was already underway. It was already happening with digital transformation and cloud migrations. It just really ramped it up overnight. It just happened, right? So we had to really pivot and to be able to protect our endpoints on a more rigorous basis, and then also really tie that into the overall overarching security telemetry that we have from the rest of the environment.
This is for both of you. What's the best way for an individual to know that they've been hacked?
Greg, I'll let you start this time.
To know that they've been hacked. Well, sometimes you don't. Sometimes, and that's the goal. It used to be, so back when I was in the corporate space, I'm talking early 2000s into, close to 2010. What they wanted to do was like spray paint the environment, knock over servers, just let them know that they're here, right? They just made a name for themselves. It was bragging rights is really what it was about. Well, they realized that there's a lot more money to be made if they just stay under the radar and they stay silent. And so that's the goal. That's the tactic today, is to really not be detected. So some of the key things that though you can look at are emails that come back to you that you didn't send, right? It's a response to something you didn't send. That's one thing that you could look at. If you're more IT savvy and you're looking at the machine, you can look at running processes. I've done that a lot, right? On my Windows machine, especially looking, running processes. I see something I don't recognize. And I go in, I look at the information on that process. I look to see whether it's signed, and really scrutinize what's actively running on the machine. And that really is part and parcel of understanding the operating system and really understanding what should be running on that version of the operating system. And that takes a little bit of time, but that's something certainly I recommend that, get familiar with those processes that are running on each individual operating system. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything that you thought of while I kind of collect my thoughts on anything else.
Yeah, no, that second point was something I was definitely going to say. Knowing your system is really important. If you're installing things every single day, your machine, you're not going to know how your machine is baselined. But if you're being conspicuous or not conspicuous, if you're paying attention to what you're installing things with a purpose, and what your machine's supposed to be doing. When it does something abnormal, you'll go, that was weird. And you begin to look at the processes. Then you begin to look at, hey, what's going on when you begin some of these advanced things. But the best way to stop from being hacked, isn't having the latest and greatest endpoint. It's not having a super tight firewall. The best thing to prevent being hacked is pay attention to what you're clicking on, where you're navigating to, and what you're installing. Layer 0 is the individual, and it's the most important part of security. They can't get in unless you let them in. They're like vampires, right? So if you let them in your door, they're going to come in. But if you pay attention to that, hey, I don't remember ordering something from FedEx. Why is FedEx sending me this email? Maybe that's not actually from FedEx. Don't click the link. Don't go to that weird site. Don't give them your information from there. If you're getting an alert from your bank, don't click the link in the email and then put your information in. Open up a new browser, go to the actual bank website, log on and look for the alert there. Just taking a couple extra steps to make sure you're going to the appropriate place, giving the appropriate person your information is going to go a really long way to make sure you don't have to verify whether you've been hacked.
Yeah, one of the other things I thought of was around the, the Uber breach that just happened, right? Well, how'd they get in? Well, they stole credentials. So if your credentials are stolen and they try to log in and there's MFA in place, well, then they're going to essentially send you an authentication request. Is this you? Well, they just did that over and over again in what's called an authentication storm. And then from that point, the user just got tired of seeing it and decided just click, yes, it's me, allowed the attacker in, right? So look for those things. If you see, authentication storms coming from MFA, your credentials are likely compromised, right? So go immediately change your credentials, notify, IT, notify your security team to make sure that they're aware, and they can do any due diligence they need to do to make sure that, the attacker wasn't able to get a foothold in the environment. I think at a fundamental, easy level, what I've done in the past is I've looked at my CPU utilization, right? Sometimes that'll spike, especially if they're mining, Bitcoin mining or crypto mining is, still going on. It's still something that, can be leveraged, and typically doesn't happen on a laptop. Usually what they use are really GPUs, right? And they use the processor there, but still in some cases we've seen activity on an endpoint, and I've seen it kind of tip me off that there's something happening here. Maybe it's a process run amok, but certainly check it out. Check out the process that's consuming the resource, the CPU, look at the information around it, even submit that thing to VirusTotal, right? I've done that before. If you're not from virustotal.com, you see a suspicious file on your machine, that's a process, then or a file, but you can submit that up to VirusTotal, and it'll tell you whether or not, basically run it through a bunch of hashes from multiple antivirus companies, and tell you whether or not that's something that's been detected as malicious within their ecosystems.
I'm going to continue on with that, but we're going to also get back to, there's a lot of questions out here about how to get started. But somebody asked, how can you tell if your information's been compromised through your bank account or your insurance company, or et cetera?
There's a lot of places that you can just put your information in and verify whether it's been part of a breach, verify whether it's out there. Most banks provide something like that. Most insurance applications do something like that. I use a password vault called Dashlane, and part of my Dashlane subscription has dark web monitoring, where you'll put it automatically tracks your login information, passwords, usernames against known breach databases. Unfortunately, you won't know that your credit card information has been breached until someone tries to use it. That's just generally how it's gonna go. So making sure you're doing the right things on the front end to not get there is going to be really key to that kind of stuff. And these institutions have the legal obligation to notify you if it has been breached. So if you've lost your credit card information through a website or through your bank, they are obligated to tell you of that. And if you get those notifications, you need to act, change your passwords, get a new bank account card, maybe the bank account number if it was the actual number that was breached, and take those steps. So when you get those notifications, they're legal, they're real. You do need to take the steps to harden that information that was let out.
I would just add to look for, suspicious activity, right, on your credit card. And a lot of times these credit cards companies now, they are identifying it for you, right? So, and they'll freeze your card, right? So if they have a service like that, absolutely take advantage of that service. That's happened on a couple of occasions. And sometimes it's a false positive and you have to go into your phone and you have to tell them, like, yeah, it's me, go ahead and let it through. That's okay. That's much better than somebody running up, charges. But of course, in that case, the credit card company is responsible for it. So if you have a debit card that has direct access to your bank account, don't use it. I mean, use it in a limited fashion. Okay. So I highly recommend using a credit card versus a debit card. If they get access to your bank account and then they drain your bank account, it's going to take a while to get that money reinstated, and you're going to have to go through multiple hoops to get it done. And with a credit card, the credit card company is going to reimburse that with not much effort to get that done. And then Ryan mentioned something about a password management solution. I think that's a key piece here, right? To kind of protecting your information, because a lot of times people are using the same password across multiple services. And even from a corporate perspective, they're using the same corporate password with their private accounts, their Gmail, right? Or their eBay or whatever services they use to log into social media even. That's a bad practice. You compromise your social media account, and they have access to your, potentially have access to your corporate account if they know, your login ID, which isn't that hard to figure out in most cases. So I would say I use something called KeyPass. It's local. It's not a cloud-based service. It's local on the machine. You can back up that database, but you provide one strong password. And I recommend make it very strong, make it a phrase, right? But use a password manager for your dozens and dozens of accounts that you have passwords for, because it is impossible to remember all of them. And you're essentially sharing of passwords will happen unless you use something like a password manager.
Okay, so now comes to the ones that I got like 4 questions out here asking. Is it difficult, first off, to get a job at an entry level with the 2-year degree program that we got?
I wouldn't say it's difficult. I would say make sure that you are open to other opportunities. If you really, really want to get into cybersecurity, please do. We need the people. But I wouldn't turn down just a standard IT position, hoping to get a security one down, in the same period, because we like to hire well-rounded IT professionals into these positions, right? So don't be discouraged if you're not getting hits immediately for IT security positions. If you go work on a network team, you go work on a desktop team for 6 months to a year, that might even open up yourself to a better opportunity within cybersecurity. But we need people, and we want people who are passionate about it. And entry level is absolutely a possibility. I moved from medical to IT in the military. I got a couple certs. I got a little bit of time under my belt in the National Guard, and then got hired right into a security position. Definitely possible, and a 2-year degree would be equivalent to the experience I had when I came into it. So it's not impossible.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. I would say get your foot in the door, grab an IT position. If a security company or cybersecurity company, sometimes what happens is they say, we want all these requirements, right? And they'll go through and you'll see, we want 4 years experience, entry level. We want 4 years experience. We want a CISSP. We want all these things, right? Don't let that deter you from applying. Apply for it, because oftentimes they just take the best, most suitable candidate for the position, and that candidate doesn't always have those things. And so there's a lot of debate right now on online, and certainly in like LinkedIn, around this entry-level position, but yet we want 4 years experience. It's ridiculous. We have a skills gap here. What you need to do is hire this person and you train them. You just train them up to be, to have the skill sets that you really need. Yeah, it's going to take 6 months or a year, but you're still going to, have that person on staff as a resource. And then I think that in one example that I can give was my nephew, who came out of Air Force. He was in the Air Force for 6 years. He went to Kuwait, and he was in telecom, right? Communication. So he wasn't in cyber specifically. He went to Kuwait, and he spent 6 months really kind of working with the cyber team over there, and got brought up to speed. And of course, I turned him on to things like Kali Linux. And if you don't have Kali Linux, by all means, grab a copy of Kali Linux. It's free. Install it on a VM and start playing around with these tools, right, that are available. It's just essentially Kali Linux is a bundle of hacking tools and security tools. Of course, use them responsibly. I'm not going to, so Put that out there, be responsible with them, but just get familiar with them and use them on your home network and start familiarizing yourself. But that's what he did. And he probably spent, and probably 4 months. He came home and immediately within 2 months had a position, right? And I would say to Ryan's point, that wasn't, he didn't have the education that you have, right? Coming out of a 2-year program, and he got a consulting position with a company. And a lot of what's happened with COVID has really opened the doors to working remotely. A lot of times you can work right at home and work remotely for a company, right? So you no longer have to be, looking for Fort Wayne jobs or Indianapolis jobs or South Bend jobs. You can apply for something out in San Diego. My niece got hired by somebody on the East Coast. So absolutely, you can use a 2-year degree. I would just say, Ryan's point is just about get your foot in the door, take whatever you can, and then use their tuition reimbursement to get the further security certifications or the further education, right? And get reimbursed for that. And then by the time you're a year or 2 years in, you've got a fully paid for security cert or degree in a 4-year, and you didn't pay for it, or at least you didn't pay for much of it, and you're ready to go really kind of kill it in the security field and set yourself up for success.
All right, so let's talk about that, because some of the places that I've been to the last few weeks have stated that certifications aren't all that important. Can you guys talk about, I realize that where I was at, maybe it wasn't, and for them, but what about right here?
If you have a certification, it lets me know you know how to talk about the information, right? If you have a Network Plus certification from CompTIA, I can talk to you about subnetting. That doesn't mean I can put you on a router and switch and have you go. Certifications just say, hey, this person has gone out of their way to learn some information. They can probably talk the talk, but I'm not going to hire you because you have an offensive security into a pen test role if you've never worked networks at a basic level, right? Yeah. Certifications will make you highlighted as a higher level candidate, but I'm not hiring one candidate over another candidate based on certifications alone.
Yeah, and so agreed again. I think that a lot of times certifications are used in the hiring process to whittle down the pool. And if you have this certain certification, right, then they have these keywords they want to match on. And so they bring you into the pool. So it does help in terms of maybe an employment perspective that you're in the stack, your resume is in the stack when it comes down to the final, candidate deliberation. I would say that I have the CISSP and the CISM, but my learning didn't come, my education came from on the job. Like I learned some in school. I learned the basics at college. Actually, I'll take that back. I was already working. I didn't even have a degree whenever I started into IT in general. I went back after the fact, after I got into security to go back to school to get my degree. But all my learning came on the job, right? I did some self-training before I even got into IT, but really that's where it goes back to just get your foot in the door, because that's where really this kinetic learning and doing is really going to fast track, right, your career. And so real world scenarios, understanding real world problems, dealing with real world people that need to get something done, to get their job done, and they're looking to you to help them get it done because they're under pressure. That's really where you pick up those skills, and that both technical skills as well as soft skills, which we can't overstate the importance of soft skills as well. So those two things, if you're looking for certifications, it's kind of like, well, can I just do the 2-year and do the certifications? I would do the 2-year and get a job in IT, and then I would look to then as if they paid for it, great. Some companies don't pay for certifications, right? But certainly look to get augment your knowledge base with some certifications and be strategic on those ones that you're going after as well.
Okay, so Ivy Tech suggests 3. And you get a choice of one of the, I think it's one of the 3. Network Plus, it's CompTIA, Network Plus, Sec Plus, and A Plus. Which one for a cybersecurity student would you be looking for when you're looking at their resume?
So Ryan and I may disagree on this a little bit, but even if he says Network Plus, I'm going to say Security Plus, just because it's kind of a foundational, right? And the CISSP, just to be clear, the CISSP is a foundational certification. It's very wide. It's complex, but it only goes so deep. When you talk about, the cybersecurity knowledge base that's required, there's a lot of different areas. It's very broad because cybersecurity involves most areas of technology, including network. But to Ryan's point, I think that networking is really a foundational skill to have to move into cyber, because I have the same experience he does, where the best cyber security people I know have a networking background. But I'll turn it over to you, Ryan. What do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I happen to have all three. My original degree was in business management, which is a pretty terrible degree to try to get a cyber job. So you guys are already better off than I was. So I went pretty hard into some degrees to kind of differentiate. Oh my goodness, there's a word there.
Yeah.
To make myself stand out against people who maybe also didn't have a cyber degree. And just from if you want to look at it real basic, A plus stacks into Network Plus, and they both stack into Security Plus. So even CompTIA recognizes that Security Plus is the higher level of certification of those three. Honestly, I would not waste your time with an A plus certification. It's inputs and outputs. It's how to turn things on, how to install things, how to work on things. You guys are getting a 2-year degree that says the exact same thing. Having a 2-year degree and A plus, I wouldn't really see a whole lot of benefit to it. If you have interest in going networking, then go Network Plus. It's a really good cert. If you really truly have a passion for security, you want to lead into security, having that Security Plus your 2-year degree is going to indicate to somebody who's hiring that this is actually your focus and where you want to go. And that's where I would recommend if this is where you desire to be within IT.
One time I heard from CompTIA guy podcast talking about, someone asked you which one is first, cybersecurity or Network Plus. It's a Network Plus first, because you don't know something to secure. You have to know something, after that you come to security.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to go with multiple, then I would if you have the opportunity to do both, I would do both. If you were going to give me one of three on a menu, I'm going to go with Security Plus,
Okay. And so now that we've talked about what the foundational there is, because I'm even including the CISSP, what would you suggest is the next step for the student for his certifications?
I mean, CSSSP is threw an extra letter in there. That's a great one. And the reason that's a really great one is before you can actually have that title, you have to be in the industry for 5 years. So you can take that test today and be an associate of it. But before you can actually have a stamp, you actually have to have a little bit of industry experience. So that carries a little bit of a weight. So definitely, if you guys are getting out of this program and you just want one that's going to actually have some juice behind it, I would go Security Plus. And then once you get your CISSP paid for, get it paid for and then get it. And make sure they pay for the boot camp too.
Yep, that's what I did. I had the company pay for the boot camp, right? Because there's so much there. I know people that have studied for the CISSP themselves and they've gone and taken the test and passed it. So, but kudos to them. That's not me. I wouldn't be able to do that. I had to go immerse myself for a week and just think nothing about cybersecurity and just quiz myself every night to retain it all, because there's a lot there. And obviously, it's a lot about test taking. I'll just throw that out there. So the CISSP, the way they structure everything in the exam, it's very much about how they phrase the questions, and it's a little bit of a gotcha type of thing that they throw in there. That aside, it's very deep. It's very wide in terms of the context. then there's 10 domains, and you have to know your stuff on those 10 domains. But I would recommend, dovetailing into returning to the point made earlier, get the position in the company, make the company pay for it. Make the company, right? Get a little bit of experience, get that check mark that, yes, I do security. And by the way, their requirement for security is very broad. You can be doing one little facet of security if you're a networking person, or if you're in Windows, or you're doing help desk and you're doing some level of security. You can say that, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what my role is, and my day-to-day function. A lot of times they'll just accept that. That's okay. So don't be deterred by that. But I would just say, just like the furthering your education, there's ways of getting the education without going deep into debt for it. So you're in a fantastic position right now with where you are at Ivy Tech, and coming out of that program. Leverage the corporation's money to further your education. It's there for the taking. And you can, they'll invest in you. You have to stick around for a couple of years, but leverage that money and advance yourself, and it'll take your career to the next level. But also, on top of all of that, there's a lot of online, training that you can take, right? There are a number of sites that you can go to. I don't want to plug any one of them, but there are a number of sites that you can pay $15-20 for a course. I did one that was an AW, because I was out of IT for a year. I was out of cyber for a year. I came back and I said, I need to brush up on, AWS and their ecosystem. And so I spent $20 and I got a whole program. But there's all of that stuff is available online that you can spend a little bit of money for and get a lot of value from.
Another student said, well, in that case, would it be just worth the wait and get a 4-year degree?
I'm going to say, if you have the 2-year degree, there's no reason why you can't start working for a company that is willing to foot the bill for furthering your education. And if I had it to do, well, that's what I did. It's not I'm doing it over, but that's what I encourage my niece and my nephew to, and anybody coming up, in the IT space, is leverage the company dollars and just go ahead and get the job. You'll have on-the-job training, which is the best way to learn, and then they pay for the supplemental education that comes along, whether that's certification or whether that's the 4-year degree and the bachelor's, right? It's still, it's out of your pocket. It's not coming out of your pocket, but you're going to reap the rewards. So I'll just say this, and this is a little bit, I don't want to sound harsh about this, but I've been through a lot of, the corporate space and the corporate environment. The corporations, the loyalty factor goes one way. Let's put it that way. They want you to be loyal, but they're not always loyal to you. So get what you can, right? You need to take care of you and your family. And so get the job, have the company pay for your education. And then later on, if you need to move on. But, or if you choose to stay for 15 or 20 years, that's up to you, but they're willing to help you get that education, take advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree. I mean, it's anecdotal, but I have a very dear friend who is the director of Red Team, internal penetration testing for a national bank, and he has an associate's, and he is doing just fine. And it doesn't. I heard that he's probably the smartest guy I've ever met, but that's here or there. The 4-year. This is if you want to do security, it's such a crazy wide field. There are so many different places you can up in security. Get the 2-year, get your foot in the door, find out what you like, get someone to pay for a focused 4-year degree. If it turns out you like just ripping packets, you can get a degree where you're gonna focus on packets. If you like throwing scripts together and all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, Python's kind of handy to have, go finish a 4-year degree focusing on some sort of programming. You don't know what you want to do in security until you get a live in some security. And there's no sense in delaying finding that out to get a degree that you might not be using. As somebody who has a business management degree, I don't really sell things anymore.
All right, I have time for 2 more questions. The first one is, are identity protection services worth the expense? And if so, which one would you recommend? If you don't mind, you don't have to.
I have one because I got breached. That's the only reason I have it. I have a couple things built into some of the products I use, like I said, the Hash link before, but just kind of depends what your budget is and if you're worried your stuff is out there.
Yeah, I have a similar story. It was, the Anthem breach that happened. I was provided some identity protection and I took them up on it. And quite honestly, I didn't see a whole lot of value from it. Honestly, I don't recall seeing any value from it. We have one at my existing work right now that I enrolled in, and I think it's really a premium that would, depending on how much it is, it's not a bad idea to have identity protection. Is it worth it? I think that what we're talking about here tonight, a lot of these things we're talking about just cyber hygiene, right? And having that security mindset and thinking about the things that you're doing while you're online. Think about the calls that you get, right? Vishing is a real thing, or they're calling you and smishing, where you just basically you're talking to somebody who's pretending to be somebody else. Identifying those things, making sure that when you send an email, it is to somebody who you do know it is, then verify. Just really kind of taking those basic one-on-one steps to make sure that when you send information, it's going to the person who you think it is. When you give your information out, scrutinize who you give it out to, right? Somebody asks for your social. It's like, why do you need that? Is it really imperative that I give you my social security number for this particular service? And just scrutinize that stuff, and having that security awareness, it really goes a long way in reducing your risk. So it's not a bad idea to have identity protection. And I would encourage you, if you feel like the service provides enough value and they're monitoring, a number of your accounts that you think it's worth the small premium, I guess go ahead and do it. But ultimately, really, you're going to provide your own insurance, right, by your actions and your behavior and how you scrutinize how you operate online.
Do you think it's better to turn on and off your, what is it called? Your financial standings?
Oh, freeze your credit score.
Thank you.
It depends. Are you building your credit, or is your credit where you want it to be? If you're in the process of building it, you probably don't want to freeze it because you're not going to continue to build it when it's in that frozen spot. Mine's open right now, but I also do pay attention to it. I use a credit monitoring service to ensure that it's not fluctuating for something weird. But I don't personally freeze my credit.
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing.
Okay.
You have credit monitoring services really in place. If you check it on a consistent basis, or your credit card company will provide, on a consistent basis. I'm not a big fan of freezing it, just because, it requires additional action. If you go to have a credit score run, and sometimes you don't even know that it's being done, right? But it's valid activity on the back end. That might hinder something that you apply for, that type of thing. But no, I wouldn't recommend that personally. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's just my own opinion.
All right. The very last question. Have you ever been scared on the job?
No, man.
Of course not. It's all under wraps.
So I would call that, I'd call that a Code Brown moment, where you realize it's hitting the fan. And yes, and it's happened multiple times, and it will happen in your career if you get into cyber, especially if you're in security operations. It will happen. I will give one anecdotal example. When I was in my corporate life, we had a virus that came in. So we had Sasser and Blaster, which swept through in 04 and 05, and it knocked out every system offline, right? It exposed a vulnerability in the Microsoft server service, and essentially caused the machine to reboot. So those two were bad, right? But then there was one that came in around 09 that propagated. It was a worm, and it propagated throughout the environment, and it took 3 weeks to a month to really tamp it down, to get a handle on it. And at that point, the company I was with was on Windows XP. This is really dating us, okay? But on Windows XP, and we were waiting for Windows 7 to come out, where, it was XP, Vista, then 7. Nobody went to Vista, right? Everybody was trying to jump over to wait for 7. Well, we did not subscribe to the Microsoft security extended security coverage. So we didn't have security patches for Windows XP. Well, in the midst of us trying to tamp this thing down, about a month in, we had a shortcut handler vulnerability come in where essentially all you had to do would be open a UNC path, or you open your share, right? It's NAS, or whether it's a Windows share or whatever. And you had a shortcut sitting there that pointed to a piece of code on the back end sitting right beside it or somewhere else on the file system. The XP vulnerability would automatically execute that code sitting behind that shortcut, and that handler vulnerability executed it, and the whole thing blew back up again, and it lasted for another like 3 weeks or something. That was the worst period. I think I had maybe saved one other time that wasn't as long lived. It was shorter, but it was maybe more intense. But that was for us, it was a business stoppage. It cost millions of dollars of revenue because we had lines shut down. And you had daily, we call them crit sits, but critical situation calls where you're on the phone perpetually. And in the middle of the night, it was horrible. So security operations, I just lay this out there, that security operations is not for the faint of heart. There are those moments that you get into. So that's why I got out of security operations and I kind of jumped to the sales side, sales engineering, because it really does require a lot of investment of time and energy. But I would say it is the best learning experience I've had in my career, bar none, is that period of 7 years where I was in security operations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, scared is maybe not the word you would use, but yeah, you do get some pucker factor moments, even when you're doing the right things. I had an alert fire on a C-suite, one of our executive members, and I had to lock their computer, which was the right call. But no one wants to lock the CEO's computer. So we're all talking.
Call that a career limiting move.
Yeah, so everyone's looking at each other, who's going to push the button because your name's going to be time stamped on there.
Yeah.
So I pushed the button, I made the right call, and I was petrified for the next 10 minutes until the CISO called me and asked what the hell was going on. Got it cleaned up. We quickly got him a replacement, got his data recovered. It was even CISOs can click on things they're not supposed to click on. And this was not with Parkview Health. I'll also verify that. So, but yeah, so even when you're doing the right thing, sometimes it can be a little bit scary.
Well, here's the other side of that. Overwhelmed. Have you ever been overwhelmed?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, perpetually.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm trying to think of a time where I was underwhelmed. It's just in cyber, especially when you're in operations, you said it in your presentation, Greg, it's 24/7. It's thousands of alerts an hour, a minute. You're in a perpetual state of being overwhelmed. And the only way that you get past that is by having well-established understanding of what you should be actually excited for. That comes from a well-trained team. That comes from a little bit of a work experience. And that comes from tuning your systems so they're alerting appropriately. So when you see alerts, they're real deal alerts that you need to act on.
And a lot more cybersecurity skill set entering the market and helping us out with it, right? So that's right. So we need more people. You need more people to man those things. There's not enough people, and this is exactly what we're talking about. When you're overwhelmed, it largely comes down to this the inundation of alerts that happen on a daily basis and making sense of that. It's onerous. It's very difficult to do. So we need more people. I encourage all of you, to seriously consider cyber. There are moments you don't have to choose to go into operations or many other areas of cyber, right? It's very wide. But certainly, can encourage your classmates, your colleagues, right, to do the same. The only way we get over this hump, I think technology improvements will help some, but we just need people. We need people to come in and really kind of, help shore up the defenses here, because it's a massive enemy that we face.
All righty. That's it. Anybody else have any more questions? No? thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. We appreciate this so much. And I want to tell you what, I want to invite you back in another year for the same thing. Try to do this yearly. We started February before the COVID shutdown. So you're the second one. So,
Okay.
all righty. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. And you take care. Stay safe. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for coming in. All right. Thank you,
Yeah, my
guys.
pleasure.
And
Take
thank
care.
you all. All right. You guys take care. Stay safe. And for those of you that I see out here online, I will see you in class next week, or you'll see some grades coming out this week. So take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Right.